Let's face it, in our busy lives, we don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. In fact, according to the CDC, only 1 in 10 Americans are eating the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables each day, missing out on essential vitamins, minerals, fibers, and antioxidants. And that's where Balance in Nature comes in. Balance in Nature sources only the best produce, free from pesticides, heavy metals, and harmful bacteria. And Balance in Nature is the best fruit and vegetable product on the market. They use only fresh, whole fruits and vegetables inside each capsule. They don't use any GMOs, fillers, binding agents, or preservatives of any kind. You're getting real food, real science, real nutrition. I would never endorse a product that I don't use myself, and since using Balance in Nature, I feel more alert, I have more energy, my focus is sharper, and I feel great. Live life to the fullest and choose Balance in Nature. And guess what? P.A.S. Report listeners can get 35% off the first preferred order. Start getting the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables you need by using code PAS at balanceofnature.com.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Happy Monday. I hope you enjoyed your weekend. We are about 5 weeks away from one of the most consequential elections of a lifetime, and I really feel like we say that every election, but this time it really feels true, doesn't it? Given everything going on, it feels true. And who controls the House and the Senate is going to be critically important, given how the Biden administration's policies have decimated the American family. They've decimated American households. And as a country, we are in a far more dangerous position today than we were just a few years ago. But it's not just the House and the Senate that's on the line. We have a lot of state races, and they're critically important too. I mean, here in my home state of New York, we have had a unified government controlled by Democrats since 2018, and this once great state has quickly went down the tubes. Crime is surging, the infrastructure is collapsing, the schools are failing, the cost of living is increasing exponentially, and for what? What are we getting for our tax dollars? What are we getting? Nothing but failed leadership from the Hochul regime and the Democrat-run legislature. But New York isn't the only state. There are critical races in several states, and the polls are tight. One of those states is Oregon, where they may elect a Republican governor for the first time in 40 years. Oregon is a deep blue state, but because of failed leadership, it seems many residents are saying no more. No more. They're not tolerating it. They see their cities under siege. They see businesses held hostage because of the homeless problem and the rampant crime wave. They see the violence regularly perpetrated by groups like Antifa, the so-called anti-fascists, who are anything but anti-fascists. And it's why I'm bringing in Andy Ngo. Andy Ngo has taken a deep dive into this violent extremist movement. He's been a victim of the movement, being assaulted several times. And we're not talking about minor assaults. We're talking about serious assaults by these so-called anti-fascists. Andy is the editor-at-large for the Post-Millennial, and he wrote the best-selling book, Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. And I am looking forward to this conversation. He's someone I wanted to speak with for a long time. So I encourage you, share this episode with others. If you find the content informative, because Andy always brings something to the table, don't forget, give the PAS Report Podcast a 5-star rating and write a review on Apple Podcasts. And with that out of the way, I want to welcome the best-selling author, Andy Ngo, to the PAS Report Podcast. If you want to get a comprehensive look into the violent extremist movement of Antifa, you need to read his book, Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. And you'll see just how serious the threat really is. Andy, welcome to the PAS Report. Glad to have you here. How are you today?
I'm okay. Thank you so much for having me on, Mr. Giordano.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. Your book is a phenomenal book. I encourage everyone to read it because you don't hear a lot about Antifa, especially now, given 2020 has passed. But I have to ask, what first drew your attention to this organization?
On the ground, I was witnessing mobs of people dressed in black and carrying weapons and wearing masks. At that time, it was unusual to cover one's face in public. And this in Portland after Trump won in November of 2016, or was announced to have won that election. These mobs of thugs carried out destruction in my home city. And it was, so I had no idea what really they were about. The next day, open up the papers of record for both Portland and the state of Oregon. And the description that they were describing them were that these were protesters who were upset about the potential rise of fascism. This is a sign of fascism in America. And essentially, it made them seem like this was a noble protest against illegitimate and anti-democratic fascist takeover in America. And the two did not, that narrative from the press did not align with the reality on the ground. I was very naive at that time. I was a graduate student in political science at university. I was working on the student paper. I just thought maybe the journalists maybe they just got it wrong on this one. We had 3 days of riots. Maybe it was just that week they got it wrong. And maybe this is just kind of a one-off thing, people rage and it'll stop. No, I was completely wrong. What happened from the end of 2016, 2017, 18, 19, and 2020 to this very day is that the violence continued. And then not only did it continue, it became more sophisticated and they were able to recruit other people. And throughout these years, I continued to document this nebulous movement of masked thugs dressed in black uniforms. And it led to me understanding that they called themselves Antifa. They declared themselves to be anti-fascists. They're anything but. They're violent extremists on the far left, and they carry out acts of wanton political violence and property destruction, and sometimes even killing people, as has happened in Portland. And in the early years of my journalism career, 2016, 17, 18, 19, what I did was I just went out with my camera to record, and I would post these videos on my Twitter. I had a much smaller following then, but some people paid attention. I tried to provide very little commentary. In fact, in my videos, I never talked. I let the footage show for itself what was actually happening. But then that made me a target, and it escalated to the point of where I was assaulted multiple times in 2019. The June 2019 assault is probably the most well-known of all because that is the one where I was beaten by a mob and then blinded and pelted with so-called milkshakes, and I was hospitalized for a brain hemorrhage and nearly died from that assault. I had a book that came out on Antifa last year, Unmasked, inside Antifa's radical plan to destroy democracy. And that's an investigation into Antifa in the United States with Portland as a case study, really. All of my writings and videos was really a warning to the public and the local elected politicians that we have an issue here that's spiraling out of control, where mobs of people feel empowered to take up arms, literally, and melee weapons and pistols and guns and knives to carry out acts of violence against other citizens in a large American city. My warnings were not heeded. In fact, the local politicians did anything and everything they could to support, both in rhetoric and in policy, the actions of these militant violent extremists, and that then led to 6 months of nearly nightly rioting in Portland in 2020 after George Floyd died, the riots of which the city is still unable to recover from today.
And we still see violence today by this group in Portland and in other places as well. But one of the things that actually interests me, so I used to be in emergency management and homeland security, take a look at organizations that represent a threat and try and look at and understand what makes people gravitate towards these organizations. Now, when we look at criminal organizations, there's usually commonality. So the Italians, it's the Italian mob. You have MS-13 where they go for other Hispanics, particularly El Salvadorians. What drives people? You talked about how this organization will recruit others. What drives people to this organization? What's the commonality between the membership?
Okay, several points to make. So first, what drives people to it? Well, fear-mongering, propaganda, disinformation, and misinformation from the mainstream left. Portland has been a city that's been fully under the grasp of leftist politics for decades. In fact, that's the reputation of the city. And for years, how that manifested was that the people there were a little weird. It's very artsy, it's creative, it has a nice creative scene. And yeah, there are lots of acts of virtue signaling that you see everywhere on these businesses and in the rhetoric of people who elected. But what happened after Trump was elected in 2016, this was a really big pivotal point because that was when the lies of the far left were mainstreamed and amplified by the mainstream left. And that bridge is very crucial because, well, we were blasted night after night, day after day, month after month from the second half of 2015 and all of 2016 that if Trump were to win, that this would be the end of liberal democracy in America, that we are on the cusp of a fascist takeover. And that outrageous lie exists on the fringes of the far left. But now we were being bombarded with that propaganda every day in print media, in alternative media, on radio, and of course on broadcast television.
And as a journalist, how did that make you feel?
Well, it completely turned upside down my faith in the whole profession. I mean, I was nascent in my career at that point, but even from the beginning, to me, it never sat right with me that journalists were abandoning ethics and to wade into political and opinion activism under the guise of journalism. And most of them weren't even hiding it, actually. What was particularly disappointing, though, is places that, have prestige, particularly the wired news services like AP or even Reuters, and papers of records like the Washington Post and New York Times put themselves very squarely on one side. And they weren't as outrageous as, let's say, Salon or Daily Beast or Vox or Vice or Al Jazeera, but all of it really was an echo chamber that was amplifying a message of fear-mongering from the far left. And so that, because that propaganda was blasted out for so long, what it did was basically it did recruitment for Antifa. So then you had now these various groups that already existed or were newly ad hoc formed in different urban areas or even more rural areas. There are certain areas across the country that are not big cities that have an Antifa presence. But these groups were saying, here, come to our arms. We will be the community self-defense. We will be the ones to protect LGBTQ, trans, plus two-spirit people. We will be the ones to protect Black and brown people. We will protect indigenous people from the fascist state, from Trump, from his Gestapo. And, well, foolish people on the left believe that. And so while the majority of people who support Antifa are not going to take up weapons themselves or bring homemade explosive devices and use them at riots, what they do is they provide the approval for that. And so when there's a landscape where the constituents of a particular area express support for this militant far left violent extremism, then the politicians are then placed with a certain pressure as well to turn a blind eye. And turn a blind eye they did. And the prosecutors through district attorney's offices, that's really the key place where, because they systematically would drop and not prosecute arrested violent criminal suspects at riots for years, it just reinforced then that the violence could be perpetrated as long as it was done for a far left cause.
We've all been there before. You want to get someone the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, but you have no idea what to get. Well, you don't have to rack your brain anymore. Gift baskets are perfect for any occasion, whether it's birthdays, holidays, corporate events, or a simple thank you. At designeryourselfgiftbaskets.com, you get to choose the theme and the products that go into the basket. You have a coffee lover? Try the K-Cup basket. You're looking for something special for the person that loves to barbecue? No problem. There's a basket for it. Make every basket unique to the person you're sending it to. And if you're in a rush and don't have time to customize the gift basket, it's not an issue, because at DIYGB.com you can choose from hundreds of pre-arranged baskets based on the occasion, theme, or recipient. And P.A.S. Report listeners get 10% off using code P.A.S. at checkout. So go to DIYGB.com, find the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, and use coupon code P.A.S. at checkout to get 10% off your order. Visit DIYGB.com today. Did they ever prosecute the individuals that assaulted you, violently assaulted you?
There have been multiple assaults and attacks on me. Out of all of that, and this probably involves in total maybe more than 2 dozen suspects, only one person was ever prosecuted, and that case is ongoing. That criminal case is ongoing now, by the way. The suspect, John Hacker, was indicted in November of last year for a May 2019 felony robbery of me. And so, yeah, that's being handled by the district attorney's office. I wish I could say I have a lot of confidence in the system, but I mean, Portland is really, it's in a bad place.
Oh, it certainly
Just
is.
so just at the beginning, just over the weekend, actually, within a span of 24 hours, we had 4 homicides. And for a city that is relatively small, I mean, it's about 600,000 people, where before 2020, we were averaging around 30 homicides a year. And now last year we had a record number, I think at 92, historic highest number ever. All of this is a consequence of the realization of the agenda of the BLM and Antifa militants.
And
But
I don't know what concerns me more when we look at this. The media has been derelict in their responsibility and they've downplayed and minimized it. But when I look at it, I think I'm more fearful about the FBI. So I think it was about a year ago, you had Director Christopher Wray testifying before Congress, where he said that Antifa is simply an idea. It's not a real organization, and therefore they don't really investigate it at all. They don't monitor it. What do you say to that? What are your thoughts on that?
yeah, well, that was part of what he said, and that's the part that's always echoed by my detractors and, of course, mainstream liberal media. However, in addition, his other comments from that same testimony is that one quote is that he said Antifa is also very much real, and that various individuals who have been federally investigated, prosecuted, charged are part of that particular ideology. Now, I think earlier you mentioned other historical and contemporary organized criminality in the United States. You talked about the Italian American Mafia and MS-13, and there are many other organized gangs and criminal organizations. What makes Antifa different, and particularly, I think, gives an excuse for law enforcement to not do more, is the fact that for the most part, they are organized in a autonomous way. And by that, I mean, it's organization, but it's also ideology. It's also movement. So really, the thing is, you can compare it to like jihadist ideology, where you can have people who have never gone to Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria. All they do is they follow a particular ideology from, let's say, IS or Al Qaeda, and just pledge support, let's say, from, for the comfort of their own bedroom in the middle of America, and then carry out deadly attacks. You can think of Antifa sort of in that way, in that you have kind of all these things merging together. You have ideology, yes, there's some places where there's like membership and actual training. And I write about that in my book. Rose City Antifa is one of the chapters of the Torch Antifa network, and they have them across the United States. These groups are actually very small, extremely secretive, and very paranoid about outside infiltrators going in and revealing all the tactics and methods. There was one person who was able to get in partially in Rose City Antifa. I write about that in my book, but halfway through the vetting process, he was booted out. So I think it's because of all of that coming together, and the fact that you don't have the same degree of organization that you will see, let's say, with MS-13, where it's more hierarchical, right? I mean, the money does flow from top to down for those who are involved in that. And with Antifa, it's all horizontal type of organizing. With that said, I think that doesn't make them any less dangerous. In fact, it makes them more dangerous. If you read a lot of their literature, they cite the failures of past revolutionary comrades in the United States, and they learn from those lessons. For example, in the US, in the 60s and 70s, we had violent communist terrorists who were carrying out domestic terrorist attacks on the homeland. Those who are involved in the Weather Underground, the African Liberation Army, and various other far-left communist groups, that these were organized as cells. They had actual membership, and the numbers were quite small. And because of that highly organized nature of these groups, the FBI was able to dismantle, was able to arrest many the members of these groups. Some remain fugitives to this day, like Assata Shakur, who is believed to be in Cuba. Cuba took in a number of wanted American far-left terrorists. And so the big lesson that if you read the literature of the far-left violent extremists today, they say, do not organize yourself in the same way. That's how you get broken up. That's how you spend decades in jail, you know? And also the nature of the communications has changed a lot now that, you know, they're very good at their operational security. So with Rose City Antifa, one of the first things you have to go to in training, if you want to even become a prospective member, is to learn how to use all these other alternative communication tools where it makes it extremely hard for law enforcement to track down and identify who's actually behind it. So they don't use browsers like Safari or Chrome or anything like that. They don't use texting or Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. You know, they have all these different things, and even burner devices and all that, where the communication takes place. And, you know, many of the people the few who do get, let's say, arrested and charged and convicted, most of them that I've seen, sort of the riffraff that is easily disposable to Antifa. These are people who may follow along in the ideology, but weren't privy to a lot of the organizing, would show up to a particular direct action and then be given, let's say, some explosive device and told to throw it somewhere. And then they're the ones that get arrested and convicted, but you know, they don't have much information about the organizational core of how those events came together that day. And so, but with that said, as I'm speaking to you today, in San Diego, this is a very big case, San Diego County. In December of 2021, 11 alleged Antifa members were prosecuted by the district attorney's office in San Diego County. And they, importantly, have been charged, all 11 of them, with, a number of felony assault allegation charges, but crucially, felony conspiracy. I reported about it at the time for Newsweek, and I followed up on it in the San Diego Reader, and most recently in the Post Millennial. Well, there's been one conviction. One pled guilty so far. Erich Yach is his name. Listed as a 6'4" male, according to the arrest records. However, in court, this individual did say that she's a woman who goes by the name Nikki. A lot of them are trans, by the way. That's a side subject. But pled guilty to the felony conspiracy to riot and various other felony assault charges. And she also ratted out her comrades, by the way, who are part of the other 10 that are being, whose trials are upcoming. So, you know, you can, even if you right now Google San Diego Antifa, you probably won't see any news reporting about it in the mainstream. But if you look at all the charging documents, what's important about this case is the prosecutors specifically say that these 11 and other unidentified individuals were part of two cells in LA and in San Diego County who carried out a riot on Pacific Beach in January 2021 against Trump supporters, against beachgoers, against random people, against a dog, against minors, against a photojournalist. So, yeah, if people say Antifa doesn't exist as an organization, well, I would say, okay, look at the allegations, which has now led to one conviction in San Diego County. Look at the charging documents, and then go to the website of Rose City Antifa and look at the Q&A, where one of the questions and answers is how you can become a member.
Now, I think your analysis is spot on, that it can be similar to jihadi groups, particularly IS, where it is decentralized. And that's what makes it so much more dangerous, that it is decentralized, that there is no hierarchy. You know, it's very difficult to get one cell to know what another cell is doing. And that's what creates a lot of problems. So you bring up a great point with that. At the end of the day, what's Antifa's end goal? Like, what exactly do they want? I tried looking through a lot of research, including your research, but the audience, most of the audience, has no idea what Antifa wants.
The destruction of liberal democracy, the destruction of the United States in particular, because they view the United States as the head of worldwide fascism, destruction of capitalism, the family, the individual. They say that they're anarchist communists. They're different from communists of the 20th century in that they don't want to create a totalitarian state when all of their actions actually would betray that claim. For example, when Antifa had the opportunity, because of months or weeks of violent chaos in Seattle in 2020, they took over 6 city streets in the middle of the biggest city in the Pacific Northwest of the United States and claimed it as their own so-called autonomous zone. And the first thing they did was they created a hard border. So they actually did create a literal state within a state where they said that U.S. law was not recognized. They had their own volunteer militia with guns, open carrying, guarding these border checkpoints. And the mayor of Seattle turned a blind eye to it for 3 weeks. It led to 6 shootings in and around that area, that autonomous zone. 2 people were dead. One of them was a child. 6 people were shot. All Black, by the way. And the irony is this autonomous zone said that it existed to protect Black and brown people from police brutality when, they had more Black people dying there than the rest of Seattle, by the way. Yeah, so I think their actions, their end goal really is the destruction of all the things that any law-abiding American would cherish, certainly any conservative and any patriot, but they want to create their own totalitarian society, and whether or not it's organized under a formalized state or not is, I think, immaterial. In effect, it is a totalitarian state. It's where explicitly there is no freedom of expression. That's the one thing they particularly really want to take down. And because they're not able to do it legislatively through getting rid of the First Amendment, what they do is they use violence to create an atmosphere where people self-censor, because if they speak out or write what they think, they will be subjected to violence and even potentially death. Day in and day out, I saw during the riots in 2020, when I was there undercover, they called for Trump supporters to be killed. They called for law enforcement to be killed. They called for all of their political opponents to be killed. In fact, they were more quiet about this part, but they also called for liberals to be killed. They view liberals, Democrats, as useful idiots. They think that they can, if they were able to gain power, and if the liberals oppose them, well, they'd get rid of them too. And they murdered a so-called self-declared I'm 100% Antifa. This is a quote from the manifesto of the militant, shot dead a Trump supporter for being a Trump supporter. He had it in his mind that Trump supporters were going around ready to kill people or were killing Black and brown people. Therefore, he was going to take this preemptive action. And I wrote about this killer in my book, Michael Rhino. He was already arrested at a riot previously and had a gun illegally. He was let go. His charges were not pursued. There were 3 incidents with law enforcement shortly before the deadly encounter in 2020, where he was arrested and let go.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot here in New York. It really is fascinating because you would think the media would wake up that if this group has their way, the media would be gone. All these people, talking heads in the media, would be gone as well. That's the mind-boggling thing. Andy, you are doing work that no one else is doing out there. And really, it's something that's so important because people need to know what's going on in the country. More importantly, they need to know about these organizations that do exist, that do cause anarchy, chaos, murder, assaults. It really is fascinating that we don't hear more about this. So I really want to thank you for coming on. I enjoyed the conversation, and I'm going to have links up to the works on the P.A.S. Report website.
Thank you very much for having me on.
fascinating conversation, and he has done some outstanding work to expose this violent organization. I wish more in the media would actually talk about the threat that Antifa poses. Be sure to check out his book, Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. You can follow his work. I have all the links up to Andy and the Post-Millennial on the PAS Report website, pasreport.com, so don't forget to check that out. As for Wednesday's episode, I'm working on some explosive stuff. It's an episode you can't afford to miss. And don't forget to share this episode with your family, friends on social media. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the PAS Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.